The announcement lasted less than 2 minutes, but its consequences reached across an entire monarchy. King Charles had made the decision no one believed he would ever make. Meghan would lose every remaining royal title, privilege, and formal connection still attached to her name. There was no ceremonial delay, no carefully worded compromise, and no path back. New evidence had reached the king's desk, and after reading it, he issued an order that changed the family forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew every person inside Buckingham Palace understood the weight of what was coming. Senior aides arrived without warning, while the communications team received one order: prepare an immediate statement. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official working headquarters, had survived crises before. This felt different because the decision struck Harry's wife and threatened the last fragile thread between father and son. The king remained alone after the room emptied. He opened the evidence file, removed his glasses, and pressed his fingers against his eyes. The monarch had resisted this step because punishment aimed at Meghan would also wound Harry. Yet the new material changed everything. Charles could protect the relationship, or he could protect the crown. He no longer believed he could do both. The order said what the palace had feared saying aloud. Meghan was stripped of every remaining royal title, style, ceremonial privilege, and recognized position. A royal style is the formal form of address used in official records, while ceremonial privileges include precedence and symbolic roles at major events. The decision was signed. It was not a warning. Negotiation had ended. Meghan received the notice privately and read the first sentence again. Then again. Her hand tightened around the page as disbelief became anger. She insisted there had been a mistake, but the legal representative on the recorded call confirmed the authorization was final. She understood that the announcement did more than remove words from her name. It severed her from the institution she had challenged, yet still carried as part of her identity. The palace statement offered no explanation for the evidence. That silence created a darker fear. A sealed appendix, an attached confidential section containing sensitive supporting material, listed names, dates, and communications known to only a small circle of senior royals. Whatever Charles had read was serious enough to make reconciliation feel more dangerous than separation. And the deepest wounds had not yet surfaced. But behind the formal order stood a father, a son, a wounded woman, and a family already divided long before the king placed his signature on the page. This was never merely a dispute about titles. For Charles, the order threatened what remained of his relationship with Harry. For Meghan, it represented the destruction of the identity she had carried into the world. And for William, it was the final test of whether the crown would defend its own boundaries. Each person entered the crisis carrying a different wound, yet all of them understood one truth. The decision would leave someone permanently outside the family. Meghan had stepped away from royal duties, but the association carried symbolic power. Her title linked her to the monarchy in interviews, headlines, and appearances. Removing it was not simply a change in wording, it was a declaration that the institution no longer recognized her place within its structure, and that rupture cut deeper than protocol. Harry stood at the center of that break. He was Meghan's husband, but he was also the king's son, raised inside the system, now closing its doors. Defending her meant confronting his father. Accepting the decree meant appearing to abandon his wife. Every path demanded betrayal, and he knew the family would measure whichever choice he made. Charles felt that cost before anyone could accuse him of cruelty. Alone, he studied an old photograph of Harry, laughing beside him years earlier. The monarch held it for a moment, then placed it face down. He understood the gesture for what it was, an admission that the order might destroy the final chance of reconciliation. William carried no sense of victory. He told Catherine quietly that supporting the decision brought him no relief. The prince believed the crown had to defend its boundaries, yet he also knew that the family's private collapse had become permanent. Catherine heard the grief beneath his restraint and realized he was mourning a brother still alive. Meghan, however, believed William had driven the punishment. She accused the future king of using the crisis to push her out completely. Then an aide corrected her during a documented call. Charles had personally demanded the strongest sanction available. That revelation shifted her anger toward the man she believed would always hesitate. Harry called his father immediately. No answer came. A legal representative returned the call and explained that every discussion concerning the decree would now pass through official council. The king had not merely signed the order, he had built a wall around it. The emotional lines were clear, but the reason for the king's decision remained buried inside one incident the palace had fought to contain. To understand why Charles crossed a line he had resisted for years, the story must return to the moment when private mistrust became undeniable evidence. The crisis did not begin with the decree. It began 6 weeks earlier, during a private Commonwealth reception at St. James's Palace, where one unauthorized conversation changed everything. Meghan had not been expected to participate, yet a confidential briefing prepared for senior royals appeared in the hands of an outside advisor only hours later. At first, the palace treated it as an embarrassing leak. Then investigators discovered the message that transformed suspicion into a direct threat to the crown. The reception had been tightly controlled from the beginning. Senior royals were discussing diplomatic engagements, charitable funding, and sensitive family arrangements that could shape the monarchy's next phase. A Commonwealth reception is a formal gathering connected to the group of nations linked historically to the crown. And this meeting carried more weight than ceremony. Every detail had been restricted, because one careless disclosure could damage trust far beyond the palace. Meghan had received limited background through a private family communication channel. That access was meant to help her understand discussions affecting Harry, not to give her permission to circulate the briefing. The boundary was clear. Yet during the reception, she recorded an encrypted voice message summarizing a confidential succession discussion and sent it to an outside communications strategist. Harry learned about the inquiry before he learned what had been shared. He confronted Meghan privately and asked whether palace officials would find her name in the message trail. She insisted she had acted only to protect their interests, arguing that silence had repeatedly left them powerless. He wanted to believe her, but the certainty in her answer did not erase the fear behind it. Charles received the first evidence during a late evening meeting. The king did not shout. He read the transcript twice, set it down, and asked why his restraint had been mistaken for weakness. His disappointment carried more force than anger, because the monarch had spent years avoiding a final break with Harry and Meghan. Investigators then recovered the reply. The strategist suggested using the information to pressure the palace before an upcoming announcement, turning a private disclosure into a possible campaign. Charles ordered the recording authenticated. Once experts confirmed the voice and message trail, doubt disappeared, and the investigation stopped being about suspicion altogether. It became evidence that Charles could no longer ignore. The monarch made one final choice before punishment. Meghan would be summoned privately and given a single chance to explain why confidential royal information had been placed in the hands of someone prepared to use it. The evidence had brought the king to the edge of action, but before he could issue the decree, he demanded to hear Meghan's explanation face to face. There were no cameras, no advisors seated between them, and no carefully rehearsed greetings. Charles entered the room, carrying the evidence himself. Meghan was already waiting, composed but visibly guarded. Harry stood beside her, refusing to sit. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the king placed the transcript on the table and asked one devastating question. Why had private information concerning the future of the monarchy been sent to someone who intended to use it against the palace? Clarence House had become the final private ground between family and crown. The residence served as Charles's London home, but that afternoon it felt more like a chamber of judgment. Only the king, Meghan, and Harry entered. A constitutional secretary, an official who advises on the monarch's legal and institutional powers, waited outside, close enough to record any formal decision. Charles kept his voice controlled. He said the crisis was no longer about interviews, criticism, wounded pride, or public image. It concerned the unauthorized transmission of confidential royal material. The monarch reminded Meghan that the briefing involved succession planning, meaning the arrangements governing who would carry future duties and authority. Sharing it had crossed a boundary that personal frustration could not erase. Meghan refused to accept the word betrayal. She argued that the palace had excluded her repeatedly, limited her access, and expected silence while decisions shaped her family's future. Sending the message, she said, had been self-protection. The king answered that protection did not require giving private information to someone preparing to pressure the institution. Harry's restraint broke. He accused his father of searching for an excuse to punish his wife, and called the meeting a verdict disguised as a conversation. Charles looked directly at his son and replied that he had not created the reason. The evidence had. Then the confrontation changed. The king opened a second section of the file and revealed that investigators had recovered not one message, but a sequence of communications. Those exchanges discussed using the confidential details to force a change in palace policy before a public announcement. Meghan tried to interrupt, but Charles quoted one sentence from a message she believed had been permanently deleted. Meghan denied planning a campaign, yet her voice lost its earlier certainty. Harry asked what else had been withheld, but neither his wife nor his father answered. Her expression shifted. Harry noticed. Silence returned, heavier than before. Charles closed the file and said the final decision would now be determined by the authority the crown still possessed. No one followed him when he left. The argument exposed the family's wounds, but the punishment would be shaped in quieter rooms, where emotion carried no legal weight. Royal power rarely arrives with raised voices. It moves through signatures, sealed advice, constitutional language, and decisions taken by people who understand that a single phrase can alter history. After the confrontation, Charles met the officials responsible for determining how far his authority could reach. Yet the most important moment did not belong to a lawyer. It belonged to the king, sitting silently as each remaining privilege attached to Meghan's royal identity was listed before him. Charles listened as legal advisors, constitutional experts, and senior household officers explained the available mechanisms. A royal style is the formal wording used to identify a member of the family, while ceremonial recognition covers precedence, official invitations, patronage links, and representation at events connected to the monarchy. The decision, they warned, would reach far beyond a title. It would alter every reference to Meghan. The king followed each line. Palace usage would change. Official records would be amended. Invitations tied to royal standing would end. Patronage associations would be withdrawn, and Meghan's place in ceremonial order would disappear. Nothing in the language sounded emotional, yet every sentence carried the force of exclusion. Charles paused when Harry's name appeared again and again in the briefing. The monarch understood that his son would not see these measures as administrative. Harry would experience them as rejection, not only of Meghan, but of the family they had built together. That knowledge slowed the king's hand. Camilla watched him grip the pen without signing. The queen consort asked one quiet question. Was he prepared to lose Harry in order to protect the institution? Charles did not answer immediately. He knew the crown could survive criticism. What it could not survive, he believed, was the use of confidential material as leverage. Then the advisors delivered the darker warning. The recovered communications may have affected an upcoming Commonwealth initiative involving sensitive diplomatic discussions. The Commonwealth is a voluntary association of nations, linked by history and shared cooperation, and a breach involving those plans could damage trust far beyond the royal household. William's written recommendation arrived before the decision. The prince supported complete removal, but requested that no punitive language be directed toward Harry or his children. His message was firm, yet restrained. Defend the boundary without widening the wound. Charles read it twice. Then he signed. The authorization moved through palace channels, reaching Meghan before the public statement could be released. The decision was no longer a possibility. It had become her new reality. The crown had made its decision in private, but the first person forced to live under the new reality was the woman whose name had just been erased from its official future. The notice arrived before the announcement reached television screens. Meghan opened it, expecting another warning, another demand for clarification, perhaps another invitation to negotiate. Instead, the first paragraph confirmed that negotiation had ended. Her titles would no longer appear in official palace records. Her precedence had been removed. Her remaining ceremonial privileges were cancelled. For several moments she did not speak. Then she set the notice down. walked to the window, and realized that the palace had acted without leaving her an appeal. Meghan forced herself to continue reading. The legal notice removed her royal styling, ended institutional access, cancelled ceremonial recognition, and severed her association with official family events. Royal styling means the formal title used in palace records and public duties, while precedence determines where someone stands within ceremonial order. The language sounded cold because it was designed to leave no space for emotion. The decree took effect immediately. No grace period remained, and no delay could be used to challenge the palace before the changes were entered into official systems. Meghan understood the strategy at once. Charles had acted quickly because hesitation would have created room for resistance. Her disbelief hardened into anger until one sentence broke through it. Future records would refer to her without royal distinction. The title she had carried through interviews, public appearances, and global attention would vanish from palace use. Meghan pressed the page flat, but her hands had begun to shake. Harry read the notice next. Fury rose before he reached the final paragraph. He struck the back of a chair with his hand and declared that the king had chosen the crown over his own son. Meghan tried to calm him, yet she repeated that the punishment had been built to humiliate them both. Their lawyer joined through a recorded call and delivered a darker warning. The order contained a confidential evidentiary schedule, an attached list of supporting material kept from public release. Challenging the decree could force those communications into open proceedings, exposing messages neither Harry nor Meghan had expected the palace to recover. Then the lawyer revealed the betrayal inside their own circle. A former advisor had cooperated with investigators and authenticated the disputed exchanges. Meghan went silent. Harry turned toward her and asked who had known enough to confirm them. Anger filled the room, but doubt changed its direction. Harry no longer asked what the palace had done. He asked whether Meghan had told him the full truth from the beginning. Silence became its own answer. The decree had united Harry and Meghan against the palace, but a private question between husband and wife was about to change the meaning of their resistance. For the first time since the crisis began, there were no lawyers, palace officials, advisors, or public statements between them. Harry closed the door and asked Meghan to sit down. His anger had disappeared, replaced by something more dangerous: uncertainty. He did not ask whether the palace had exaggerated the evidence. He asked whether she had withheld parts of the story from him. Meghan looked away before answering, and in that hesitation, the conflict shifted from a battle against the crown to a reckoning inside their marriage. Harry kept his voice low. Their public response had not yet been approved, and no advisor stood nearby to soften the truth. He reminded Meghan that he had defended her because he believed the confidential material had been shared by mistake, without a plan to use it. During the confrontation, he had accused Charles of searching for a reason to punish her. Now he needed to know whether the king had simply uncovered what was already there. Meghan answered slowly. She admitted that the outside strategist intended to create pressure on the palace, but insisted she believed it was the only way to stop further exclusion. She had watched decisions being made around them, she said, while every attempt to influence the process was ignored. To her, the message had not felt like betrayal. It had felt like leverage. Harry heard the difference, and it wounded him. Loyalty pulled him toward his wife, but the evidence pulled him back toward his father. Charles had not invented the communications. The palace had not manufactured the deleted phrase. For the first time, Harry felt abandoned by both sides at once. Meghan then revealed the part she had withheld. The sentence quoted by the king belonged to a longer exchange in which she approved a plan to force the palace into public negotiations. She had believed that controlled pressure would produce a private settlement. Instead, it had given the crown the proof needed to close the door completely. Harry stood in silence before making his decision. They could criticize the punishment, but they could not honestly deny the messages. He rejected a draft statement accusing Charles of fabricating the case and removed every line that could be disproved. Their revised response acknowledged disagreement without claiming innocence. Meghan accepted the change without protest, while Harry understood that defending their marriage now required admitting the weakness in the story they had prepared together. It reached the public just as the first broadcasts began carrying the decree across the world. The private truth had ended any hope of reversing the decision. and now the monarchy's most painful family judgment would be placed before millions. By sunrise, the decision was no longer confined to palace rooms or private conversations. It covered front pages, dominated broadcasts, and drew crowds toward royal gates. Some saw Charles as a monarch finally defending the institution. Others saw a father using royal authority against a woman already outside palace life. But one image captured the moment more powerfully than any debate. A newspaper held above the crowd at Windsor, carrying 4 enormous words: "The King closes the door." International coverage moved with stunning speed. Broadcasters described the decree as the most decisive action Charles had taken against a member of his immediate family since becoming king. A royal decree is a formal order issued under the monarch's authority, and this one removed every remaining title, privilege, and official connection attached to Meghan's royal identity. The palace confirmed the decision in a brief statement, but refused to publish the confidential evidence behind it. Charles watched the coverage without speaking. Commentators praised the monarch's firmness, then questioned whether protecting the institution had cost him Harry forever. The king heard both judgments. He had secured the crown's boundary, yet every headline turned that success into a personal loss he could not hide from himself. William faced the same contradiction in public. The prince appeared composed during an official engagement, but before stepping toward the waiting cameras, he gripped Catherine's hand for a moment longer than usual. She understood what the gesture meant. He supported the decision, but he did not celebrate the fracture it confirmed. Then the debate shifted. A leading broadcaster reported that the evidentiary schedule contained authenticated digital records and testimony from a former advisor. An evidentiary schedule is a confidential list of material supporting a legal decision. That disclosure weakened claims that the decree had been driven only by personal hostility and made reversal appear almost impossible. Outside Windsor Castle, supporters and critics gathered beneath the headline that had come to define the morning. One side defended the king. The other accused him of cruelty. Voices rose until police separated the two groups, while the newspaper remained lifted above them. The king closes the door. Meghan read the coverage in silence. Harry refused to watch any longer. Charles stayed seated, and William continued his duty. The decision had become public history, but its deepest cost still belonged to 4 people who could no longer pretend that reconciliation remained within reach. Each understood that the decree had settled the legal question while leaving the emotional damage exposed before an unforgiving world. The noise outside the palace would eventually fade, but Charles, Harry, Meghan, and William still had to confront the permanent meaning of what had been done. When the documents were filed, the broadcasts ended, and the crowds finally disappeared. The result was painfully clear. Meghan no longer possessed any remaining royal title, official privilege, ceremonial standing, or recognized role within the monarchy. Charles had defended the boundaries of the crown, but he had also accepted the likely end of his relationship with Harry. There would be no reversal, no secret compromise, and no restoration. The decree succeeded institutionally because it demanded a devastating personal sacrifice from everyone involved. Charles knew the order was final. Palace records removed Meghan's styling, invitations disappeared, ceremonial precedence ended, and royal connections closed. Precedence is the order that determines where people stand at events, and losing it meant she no longer held a recognized place within the monarchy. Her former status could not return. The palace closed the internal investigation. Officials secured the evidence, enforced the sanctions, and ordered that the case would not be reopened. An internal investigation is a private inquiry into conduct and records. Its closure ended any hope that delay or family pressure could soften the decision. Charles returned alone to the room where he had signed the order. The king turned Harry's photograph upright again and faced what authority had cost him. He had protected the crown, but not his family. Success had arrived wearing the shape of loss. Meghan faced her own ending. She removed stationery carrying her former royal styling, folded it once, and placed it away. The gesture was final. She had fought to preserve that identity because it carried recognition and memory. Now she accepted that the palace had erased it from its future. Harry refused to launch a formal challenge. He understood that legal action could expose the communications and deepen the damage to Meghan. His silence was not surrender to his father, it was protection for his wife. William supported Charles publicly, but privately told Catherine that victory was the wrong word. The prince knew the monarchy had survived only by admitting reconciliation had failed. She heard the sorrow beneath his certainty and understood that the crown's strength had come from a family's collapse. The decision defined Charles's reign. Royal status had not survived a breach of trust, yet the punishment revealed the monarchy's oldest tragedy. It could preserve the institution while breaking those born closest to it. Meghan lost her final connection to royal authority. Harry lost the last illusion that the palace would bend for him, and Charles preserved the crown by accepting a wound no title could ever heal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.